Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to be starting a new Framelock folding knife series, and I'll be making a flipper style frame lock like this, which is a drop point, and my clip point. Now, I made a frame lock video several years ago, but I thought it's a good time to make a new one or an updated one that's a little more detailed. So if you don't want the details, you can go back and look at the old one. I have changed a few of my processes and I do things a little different now, but it's kind of the same, except we will dive in deeper here from tool usage and other methods of doing this and ways I've made them in the past, etc. So I will be using a mill to make the knives and a few more modern tools, but I made several liner locks and frame locks in the past without a mill. Matter of fact, so this is about a second or third liner lock that I made, and that was made totally with a drill press and a slitting saw on a drill press. Something I want to mention here is the liners in here are 3/16L stainless. That is about 60 thousandths thick. And I have used this knife a lot. I carried it for many years, doing all sorts of things, skinned a lot of game with it, and no issues with the liners. So titanium is the liners that most people use today. Back then it was kind of infant, used in knives, but it's widely used today. I really like it because it's lightweight and tough and holds up really well. And there's a few other reasons that I'll go over as we get along, but that is a stainless liner in that liner lock. Now this frame lock was about the third frame lock I made. It was also made entirely on a drill press. It's nothing pretty to look at, but I carry it, and as a matter of fact, it dispatched a couple wild game animals this morning. Actually, I'm the one that took care of that this morning while you watched. I know. I should have mentioned that, Bubba. I'm sorry. I mean, I really appreciate you. You're a great scout. You do excellent work dispatching game. I just couldn't do it without you, man. Do you mean that? Yep. Well, it'd be really great if you could go out and do some more scouting, and maybe we could do something about that this evening. Okay. I can take care of it. I'll be back in a bit. Catch you later. So yes, this frame lock was made entirely on a drill press. Now it still performs very well, lock holds up great, and it still has the same amount of lockup. But what I really like about these is it's titanium and stainless. All the hardware is stainless, the blade, and so you have titanium and stainless. I can get this thing soaking wet, get it underwater, bang it out, maybe oil it a little later, and she's good to go. You don't never have to worry about issues with things happening there, rusting your bearings and that sort of thing. Not like you would normally. But you can certainly put carbon steel blades and that sort of thing in them like I will be doing. So here's a feather Damascus frame lock I made a couple years ago. This one actually got in blade and knife magazine. So we're mainly going to be focused on making a frame lock, and I'll be using stainless blades, and we'll cover all the tools. So let's come down here and look at our patterns. I use software to do this. I use a program called Inkscape. It's free, and you can design just about anything you want in there. You can even export and have them cut out if you want to. The way I learned to do this was by designing a pattern on paper and cutting it out and using a pen to go through my liner or my frame and through the pivot area and work it back and forth until everything worked. And that's how many makers did it for years, and some still to this day. And there's nothing wrong with that. I really like using software because I can set it up. I can actually rotate the blade in the software. This one's not correct. As you can see, the blade's down in the backspacer. But I can assure you I got everything correct here. You can design everything. You can do all your hole layout and even mark the centers with the software. And so I've got a drill pattern and everything. And then I take and cut this out, and I can glue it onto my liner material, or if it's a blade, I can glue it onto blade material and then cut them out. So every knife is not going to be exactly the same. You're doing this by hand. You're not having them laser cut or water jet. However, you could. Mine are not. I'm doing everything by hand. And so one of the things I do is I have trays that are separated, and I put each individual knife and all of its parts and components in its own tray. That way I keep everything from getting mismatched and that sort of thing, because you're going to have, a few thousand differences in each knife, and you want to keep everything the same so you keep your accuracy and your blade functioning. You'll have mess ups doing this. For here, an example is when I was making this particular frame lock, I messed up the liner. So it's hard to make a set of liners for a blade when you've already ground your lockup area. You can do it, but it's not easy. That's a blade that I won't probably use. Now here's one in a different case. Everything worked perfectly until I got up and ground my lockup. And when I did, I overground it. No good. So I'm back to the same place with that blade as I was this one. It's a lot of mess ups, easy to mess up doing this all by hand, and you just have to be very careful and take your time. It's why it takes a lot of time to build these knives. And so I've got several knives here that are ready to finish, and these have to be finished profile, do all the drilling, and then heat treating. So after I heat treat, I'll do all my cleanup work. If it's a clip, I come in here and cut the clips and grind the bevels. And when it comes to tools, that's where you can really go deep dive. I mean, all of the mills, the counter bores, and all of that stuff, depending on your hardware you use. If you change up a screw head from a button head to a socket head, that sort of thing, you're going to have to use a different counter bore. Now, I didn't always use counter bores. I used drills and end mills. And that made it kind of difficult because you got to really line up everything perfectly, centered, lock down the equipment you're using, and it just really makes it tough. Now I'm using a DRO on my mill, but I also have a primitive DRO on my drill press, one of my drill presses that I used to make my earlier frame locks and folders. And it was just digital calipers that I modified with brackets and made it fit my drill press. And you'll see a lot of people doing that today. Another thing is I have a written procedure that I use and keep and refer to because I can't always remember exactly everything. I'm getting old. And I also make this available to my patrons. So this is a living document because I'm constantly updating it, and I can't remember when the last time I updated it, but this is specifically for frame locks. And more about tools, I use a surface grinder now to get my dimensions right on my parts. I didn't always have a surface grinder. The one I have right now is only a couple years old. Before that, I was using a magnet in my hands to hold parts and really try to dial them in. It makes it extremely difficult, but you can do it. It just takes longer, less efficient, probably less accurate. I have noticed a tremendous improvement on accuracy when using a dedicated surface grinder to do this. So I cut my lock bar with a mill, but let me show you a tool that I made several years ago to cut your lock bar. It's primitive, but it works, and it's kind of sketchy, but take a look. High tech, my friends. Now this is an old router, trim router, that I just made a frame for where I could mount an arbor in here with a cutoff wheel and put my frames up here and cut them by sliding. Now this assembly here, I'll just loosen these two and I can slide it up and down to adjust it exactly where I want to. It's high speed, it works great, but it's primitive, but it will work. For a few dollars, you can be set up cutting your locks like this. You can do them on a drill press, but you have to remember a drill press is not designed for side pressure. And you can loosen up your Jacob's chuck and it'll fall right out on you. It could hurt you, but you can do it. I did it. I'm just not going to recommend it for that reason. Okay, now I'm going to show you another tool. This is homemade, handmade to cut lock bars, and I'll show you a tapping tool. Introducing the Redneck Tapper 1000. Yes, this is just something I fabricated. So I have a chuck up here with a broke counter bore that I can use to set a tap into and tighten up with a set screw right here. And I can just tap. Now, there's Tap-matics out there where you put them in your drill press, you tap, it'll automatically tap, stop, and then you raise back up and it spins out. I don't have one of those. I will get one of these days. I'm just poor. But this works great, and I still use it. Now, I use thread forming taps, and basically what that does is it uses pressure to push the threads in instead of cutting them in. I find it works much better, especially on those small taps, and we'll be covering some of those. I use down to an Alt 80 tap, and works great. Thread forming taps. So in this particular frame lock, I'm going to be cutting a channel in here with a hidden pin. Now, you can do this on a drill press. There's some jigs you can make and do this. Again, side load, be careful on a drill press. But I'll be doing this in my mill. Now, you can design your folders without that channel there with just a traditional stop pin up here. It'll be up here on you behind your blade at the top somewhere. And you just have to design your folder that can work that way. This one will not, because it's a flipper style, and that flipper would come up and hit it. Now, if I move the flipper, yeah, I could make some of that work, but I found this design to work great the way it is. It's a little more time consuming to cut that channel, and but it works. Now, what I'll do is try to cover each of these tools as we go along, and depending on your design will dictate taps and mills and stuff that you use. This is what I use for this particular design, for all the hardware, etc. So you have to do the research when you're designing and figure out what tools you're going to need to do your cuts and that sort of thing. Now, there's a lot of places you can get your parts, hardware, titanium, and all for making frame locks and liner locks. I'll throw some out there. They don't sponsor the channel, but I'll throw them out there for you. USA Knife Maker, Alpha Knife Supply, Tie Connector, several of them out there. But what I highly suggest when you get titanium, especially for frame locks, is to get knife maker grade material. It's surface ground, that sort of thing. Same goes with blade material. If you're doing stainless and you don't have a surface grinder, and really all you'll have to do is some lapping on a flat granite plate or something like that, get surface ground stock. You won't have to deal with as much problems with warped up, messed up blade material. Some of the stuff you buy is just shear cut and it'll be warped, messed up. Some companies will go ahead and have that surface ground be good and flat when you get it and easy to work with. Now, since I've already got these cut out, I glued my templates to the steel and got them rough cut. They just need cleaning up. I won't bore you with that part of the process. It's pretty simple, like any profiling you do. Leave yourself a little bit of room, and you don't want to take too much right here where your lock cut's going to be, or your lock face. You're going to cut that in when you get to that point, so don't get too crazy back here. But first thing I'm going to do is get the pivots drilled and get this channel cut for my stop pin. So let's start there. So my blade is just roughly profiled. If you notice, I'm leaving a little bit all the way around. I'll come in here and clean this up real close after I get my holes done. I stay off of this back end lock side. I don't go past the line, even though I'm going to cut past it. I clean it up, and then when I go to do the lock face, I'll cut it in. But I make sure I get my holes where they need to be before I do the final profile in case I get off. Now I'm going to show you a couple ways to center punch, and it's very important that you center punch and drill your holes exactly where they need to be. I mean, a couple thousandths off will start affecting your lock and fit up. But I'm going to show you a couple ways. The first way is just the old-fashioned standard way. Now, I use these optivisors to see what I'm doing, and I put a light on the subject from the other side. This way I can see and I can get a good mark. The other method I'll show you when we get on these scales, just to show you, you don't have to have fancy tools. You can still use center punch. I want to come in here and I want to get this as close as I can to the center or my target marks. And that one's punched. And you know, I can see that it's off probably a thousandths, but that's why I leave this on here. I can adjust if I need to. Now, these are going to have tracks cut in the blade because I'm going to hide the pivot pin in the blade. Now, I learned this method of cutting tracks in here from Ecom Knives. I believe in giving credit where credit's due, and this is the method he uses, and that's where I picked it up from. I don't think he's no longer making knives, but he had a channel on YouTube a long time ago. It may still be there. But what I'm going to do is come in here, instead of marking these dead on the X, I'm going to come back a little so I can adjust that when I'm doing my final lock up and fit up. So I'm going to punch that one, and I'm going to come forward on this one, on each one. So you can see I'm forward and forward, and the track will be right here. When I go to do the final fit up, I'll leave my jig set up in my mill, and I'll adjust those by putting it in out of the mill, making the cut. First thing I'm going to do is drill the pivot, and I'm using a number 13 drill for the pivot hole, and I'll come back and ream it to exact size. Number 13 is like 0.184, 0.185, something like that, and then I'll ream it to 0.187. I'll be using a spot drill to start it though, a 1/8 spot drill. Like I said, you can do all this on a drill press. I've done it, but cutting this track is a little tricky. You got to make yourself a little jig to do it, and you can still do it on drill press. You just got to take your time. But like I said, it is risky because of the drill press is not made for side loads. You'll loosen up your taper, your Jacob's chuck will fall out. But anyway, let's get our holes marked and we'll start drilling our pivot. Let me talk a second about a couple things that I kind of go over too quickly and need to tell you about. So I've got a 1-2-3 or a 3-2-1 machinist block in here. They have threaded holes in every other one and one in the center. And I put them on parallel bars. This thing needs to be completely 90 degrees to your tool that you're cutting with, especially on that pivot. So if you cut your pivot, you know, at a slight angle, then it's going to throw your blade centering off. It has to be square. It's very critical. That pivot hole is one of the most important parts of this process, getting it square and to size. So I keep it square. And if you notice that I just have a stop on here and I let the bits center themselves and then I hold them down with my hand. They can't go anywhere. They can't come up, and let them cut. Now I use carbide tools exclusively. They last long, and I cut in titanium as well, so I just use it on everything. So you'll need to refer to cutting speeds and all that. I'm all over the place with it, but Lakeshore Carbide is the best carbide tools. So right now I've got a 3/16 reamer in here. I'm gonna go ahead and ream these holes, and then I'll start working on the track. But most importantly, keep everything square. I do some peck drilling. I clean the hole by just blowing it out, or however you do it, and continue drilling. Taking my time, keeping it flat, keep it square. So with all the pivots reamed, and before I go to the next step, which is cutting the holes for the stop pin track, I want to deburr the backside, because every time you go through your blade or your frame material or your liner material, whatever you're doing, you need to deburr the backside, or that'll cause a problem. You'll get a out of squareness there because of that burr. Now I use a lap plate. You can use a granite surface block or your disc sander. I use a disc sander, but it's such a small burr. I can go to lap plate with some 600 grit paper, and I lay it on here and I just back and forth, and you can hear it and feel it when it goes away. And there it's gone. and it's quick. I don't have to run over to my disc sander, but that knocks that burr off, and now I can lay it up there. It'll be flat. I'll punch the holes. And so I'll take a 1/8 bit, 0.125, drill holes at the starts and stops of the track. And if you remember, I punched them just shy of where they actually need to be. And then I will put in a mill and cut it to size. The mill is slightly larger, and that gives a little bit of wiggle room in there for the pin, and so I don't be catching as the pin is moving. Once I punch those holes, I'll have to deburr again, set them back in the jig, and cut the tracks. With the start and stop point of the stop pin track drilled, now I've got a 9/64 end mill in here, and I'm going to cut the track. The 9/64 is a little larger, of course, than the 1/8, so that would allow me a little room on each side of the pin where there's no touching as the blade moves up and down in the folder. So we'll go ahead and get this cut. This takes a little while. Like I said, you can do this on a drill press with a jig. That's how I done it originally. It's kind of sketchy, but you can do it. All right, so after I got the tracks cut, I went ahead and cleaned up these profiles, got them up to 600, and I will hand sand this later and clean them up, make sure I don't have any burrs or hard spots. And I will also clean up this track after I do the fit up. Right now, they're going to be short a little, hopefully, and then I'll come in here and clean these up and do the heat treating, and I'll have to clean them up again. Now it's time to make the frames. So I got a piece of 0.155 thousandths titanium. This is knife maker grade. It's very flat. It's very expensive. And I will go ahead and start cutting out the frames. I will put the templates on there and do the same thing and get them cut out. But I'll show you more about that process on the next video because we're out of time. I know I did a lot of talking here, but the next video will get a little more detailed and process work and less talk. But I want to thank my patrons, and I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.